and maybe we'll start the meeting with this, the official part of the meeting. There's some things we do ourselves because they're within our purview, because we have to do them. It's our responsibility. If something's going on that I could stop, that's a bad thing in this church, it's my responsibility to stop it. If there's something I could do, in terms of being a leader, there's things we all could do, but in terms of being the senior-most leader, if there's something I could do that could better this church, that's my responsibility to do it. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to hopefully deal with negative conditions if they're present, help with those, and to accentuate the positive, do whatever we can to grow and to build. So we do have a level of responsibility that we have to keep. We don't get off the hook by saying God will take care of it. We have to take responsibility for the things within our purview. But there's some things that I would advise all of you this way, no matter what level the Lord takes you to in terms of your calling. I would advise all of you with anything that can cause damage or anything that would have a significant domino effect. I would strongly advise you to wait on the Lord, even if you think I have to deal with this. The only thing that you have to deal with in an emergency type of approach to something is something that is dangerous, like something's about to happen that could really hurt somebody, emotionally, physically. There's some things we just have to act immediately. It's like if you thought your child was going to run out in the road, you can't say, well, let's see what happens. There's some things you just have to do. No, we're not going to pray about it. Wait for the Lord to stop them. He could, but many times we're responsible. The bottom line is that what we're responsible for, we have to try to take care of ourselves. If we're capable of it, if we have the authority to deal with it. And then things that are especially sensitive where damage could be caused, where, like I said, you could hurt a person, you could hurt a family, you could hurt the whole church. You better wait on the Lord. And I don't mean wait months. You might have to. I had a situation I had to wait several months for in Mansfield when I first got there, Brother Chappell, that I knew was coming to a head. It hadn't gotten to the point where it was so clear, but there was a feeling like something's not right here and this needs to be dealt with. And the Lord, like he always does, had the perfect timing. When it was time to deal with it, everything was in place where it could be dealt with the right way and in the right spirit. And even the person who had to be corrected, it was more than correction. The person that had to be taken out of their position walked away from that saying, despite that, I felt like Brother Bear loves me. That's always the goal. No matter what we have to do, if it's something very hard that we have to do, we know it's going to hurt somebody, but it's necessary. You want the person to walk away saying, but I know they love me. See, because everything has to be motivated by love. It's not just, well, I don't like you in that position, and I don't like you as a person, and so you're out. No, everything has to be motivated by love. And if it's not motivated by love, you're not only not going to be effective, but you probably shouldn't do it to begin with, because you're going to be counterproductive. I've got so many different things going through my mind, and I do want to see what questions you have before I get onto a subject. There's a lot of paths right now I could follow down. Well, let's just talk about that for a little bit, dealing with conditions and things. It is something we need to be very careful about. I was talking to someone here lately, several of you I may have even talked to about this in relation to some things. I know Brother Chappell and I have talked about this many times through the years. There's several things you really need to consider when you're dealing with conditions. Whether you're a pastor dealing with conditions, if you have that level of authority, if you're a department head in a church, or you're in charge of something, or it can happen if you're put in charge of a service. Some of you have been put in charge of services where you had some challenges in that service. In fact, probably multiple ones. You had unique things happen in the service where you're not the pastor, and now how am I going to deal with this? We've had everything from people treating you very disrespectfully. We've had things where people started doing things in the service that were maybe out of order, and how do I handle that? Because I'm not the pastor. And other things that can occur, I could give maybe more colorful examples, I'm not going to, but other things that can occur that can make it very hard on you if you're taking a service, if you're pastoring a service in the sense of in the assistant role, you're taking responsibility for a service. But it can affect you in terms of your family, it can affect you in any leadership position you're in. You have to think of the domino effect of everything. You have to think of the domino effect. In other words, here's my choices. There's a situation I have to handle, here's my choices. Where will each of these choices possibly or maybe even inevitably lead? I think you and I were talking about this here not long ago, Brother Kirsch. Would me doing that create a better situation or a worse situation? I'm not going to overcomplicate it. It's that simple. Now, I'll give you an example of something that you don't have a choice about. The situation I referred to, which I'm intentionally not being specific about, I didn't have a choice about. This person had looked like they were headed towards disqualifying themselves from their position. They presented their situation as if they had not done so, but things were starting to percolate where it was pretty obvious something's going on. Then it got to the point when it did come to a head where I had multiple of the elder saints come to me and multiple witnesses That's important. I may come back to that later on another issue. But multiple witnesses who are extremely reliable witnesses, all of them experienced it. They were there when it was all happening. There was no way to handle that wasn't going to cause damage. Because once they crossed a certain line, I had given them a line, and I said, I'm going to get closer to it now, but I'm not going to go further than this. You can have certain feelings. You could even have certain desires, but you cannot act on them, and you cannot promote them. I said, if you're wrestling with something, we're all wrestling with something. It could be a lot of different things. But if you act on it, if you're doing it, or you're promoting the thing, you cannot be in any kind of position in this church. In both of those things, they got to the place where they were both doing it and promoting it. And the interesting thing is, when folks came to me and reported it, and they weren't the type of folks that would want to report it, they loved this person. So that tells you something all by itself. They weren't enemies of this person. When they came to me and reported it, I got 2 different reports from 2 senior people in the church. One was the promoting, one was the practicing. And I thought, well, that's the nail in the coffin of that. Now, there was no way to deal with it that wasn't going to cause damage. Because when you take somebody out of a position who is very respected and loved, you're going to cause damage. But there was no choice, because you will do more damage to a church. This is really important, brethren. You'll do more damage to a church by allowing uncleanness in that church than any other thing that you could think you're protecting. I'm going to keep a blow up from happening. And I'm going to tell you what, God was so good that the very people who really loved and would have backed this person no matter what, because they'd never have believed an accusation, they were the ones who saw it. I say God was good, it breaks my heart, all right? But I mean, he was so systematic about how he dealt with it, God, that when it came out right in front of the very people that would have never believed it. So God knows how to help you with those kind of situations. But I do want you to be considering in anything you do, I mean, from the standpoint of being a husband and a father to being in a leadership position in the church, you have to consider the domino effects of your words and your deeds. And as a leader, and that's what I'm doing, some of you are already significant leaders, but I'm trying to train you to be leaders in the kingdom and to rise to whatever level God has for you. And I know he's got some very serious callings in this church. We are not a church that has to look for people with callings. There are some serious callings in this church. And I want God to use you to the greatest level he can possibly use you to. So I'm trying to give you some advice ahead of time that'll apply practically in your normal life, but it'll also apply if you do rise to a level of leadership in the kingdom. And it would even apply to people who are department heads in our church right now. You better think of the domino effects. The way you talk to a person, the things you do, the decisions you make, you always have to be thinking about that. It's very similar to one of the lessons of gun safety, where they always tell you, you cannot just be looking at what's right in front of the muzzle of that gun. You've got to be looking at what's on the other side of what you're seeing. So if somebody broke into your home and they break into the door of your room and you lift the gun, and on the other side of that person is the wall to your children's bedroom, that bullet may go through them and on into the wall and hit one of those kids. You have to be thinking what's on the other side. Yep, what's the backstop and what's past it, and will the backstop actually stop it? Or is it going to penetrate that and hit something else? Because most of the time, things like that, where you have to deal with something that's pretty serious, it's going to affect more than one person. Those of you who could potentially be called to be pastors, or those of you that are already pastors, one level or another, you got to realize that sometimes you make a decision that you think is necessary in a church, and you end up doing more damage by that maybe hardline approach to that than if you had approached it a little differently. But we can get in a mindset like this has to be fixed. Okay, it might need to be fixed, but if fixing it breaks 3 other things, is that fixing it or not? Well, I fixed that. You fixed that, all right, and tore up a bunch of other things. So it's very important to think about the domino effect of things. I could talk about that for a while. I'm not going to. I've got a lot of things in my mind. I want to see what's on yours as well. Brother Fairhurst, what do you have?
When a situation arises in a service that you happen to be in charge of that service, and an individual gets out of order, you have to think of how can I adjust this situation from out of order to bring it back into order without that person knowing I just changed their thought pattern so that I don't embarrass them, especially if that person is new, they're not accustomed to our ways, and you don't want to harm that individual. So you have to consider, how do I do this, changing the pattern there from out of order back to in order without harming the individual. And when you're on your feet and it's going on, you have to rely on the Lord real quick. And that way it doesn't create boom, there goes the service. but it brings it back to where the person, maybe they did want to say something, they didn't know how to say it, and you help them to say it in the right way, and it brings it back into order from disorder.
If I can use this word, that's thinking tactically. You have to think tactical in that approach, just like you're describing, Brother Fairhurst. I remember, I'm sure you remember, before you were in the ministry, I was in the ministry, we had a situation where the person here asking for money. Brother Moore was out of town. I had one of the services, one of the other brothers had the other service. The trustees told him to come back in the evening time. He came back drunk. And he had gone to the hotel up here, and he knew the church had an account there, and he had rented a room under our account. And Brother Bear dealt with him. Oh, that was one of those moments of, what do you do? I mean, it really kind of disrupted everything because he got belligerent. So, but you have to think tactical in your approach. You made the mention, Brother Fairhurst, that maybe that person is new and they just don't know. Mm-hmm. And they're a soul that we're trying to save. And we want to always be merciful up until a point. If they are starting to do iniquity, that's a whole different ballgame. And then we have a duty to act. You got to love them when they're not lovable. And that means putting all your prejudices aside and looking at them as this is a soul that God brought to this church. He's going to do things that are not going to be correct. And how do we help him without embarrassing him, without pointing the finger, without saying a hard word? And yet, oh, what is that? We've heard it said before, find the last thing that you can agree on and tie into that and take it a little further. And so I agree with you. I agree with you 100%.
It's also not setting yourself up to be the hero of the situation.
No.
When you do that, you lose. But when you can direct the individual in the right way and work on the widest margin in bringing it from a wide thing that's going on to a narrow thing and let the person escape without being harmed. And sometimes when you're on your feet, you have to think fast and quick. And some of it goes back to how would you like to be treated if you were about to be embarrassed?
That's it.
How would you feel if somebody said, brother, you're out of order. What are you doing standing up while I'm talking? But the widest margin isn't to do that because you're going to ruin the service. Then all you can do is say, well, we better go home. We just messed up. But like Brother Chappell's saying, a person has a soul.
Yeah.
And whether they come back or not is not the issue. Is that how you handle the situation in front of your peers also.
Sure.
Because they're going to learn from you. Well, I guess it's all right to just tell them people to sit down. No, it's not all right to tell them to sit down. No. Now, there is a time and a place, but that takes an authority that's different than my authority. Mine stops where that goes. That's where a Brother Bear, a Brother Moore, Brother Chappell in those positions can handle a situation that requires that, brother, you are out of order. And I've heard that happen in the ministers' meetings.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a different level of authority that takes that. But in a regular service where we have it at home, Brother Bear, we're there to nurture, to help in any way that we can. Whether they're new, older, they're all tender. We're all still tender. I get my feelings hurt sometimes.
You'll be surprised. I just had to do something today. A couple of our sisters had got offended because some of the saints are not using brother or sister. They're using first names. I'm just so close to Robin, I just call her Robin. And she was talking to me about it because she knew those sisters were offended. And I corrected that by saying, I'm sorry, I need to call my wife Sister Chappell. I said it's given respect, it's given honor. And I corrected the situation by using me as the one being corrected so those sisters would know, because in their mind it was disrespectful. And so, yeah, I changed that.
There's something you were talking with today that, man, I felt very strong about in Psalms are about walking about Zion and telling the towers thereof. That was a dream that Janet had, 4 or 5 years ago. And the lady walked up to her in this dream and handed her that piece of paper. And she opened it up. That was the scripture. And there was something you were dealing with today. You didn't go down the path of it all the way, but I really felt something strong in that. It's so we can tell the generation coming on the scene here. There's something that happened in this assembly that the generations coming need to know, whether they're new whether they're from Haiti, whether they're from Africa. You need to know how God established this assembly. It's not just I think Brother White just felt like he started a church.
No.
It goes deeper than that. And the bulwarks of it. And I heard you touch on that not too long ago about the bulwarks of the palaces. There's a strength that has to be in an assembly in order for God to be able to use it like he's using it now. I mean, that's something that it's just, I'm going, oh God, I'm in a fearful place. But I'm in the house of God. Hallelujah. And it's his judgment seat. And it's not judgment according to, you're going to get out of here. It's judgment according to life. Got a stigmatism on judgment. Judgment according to life is what I'm looking for. And that's more powerful than anything. Saw a sign coming home. Where will you be? It had heaven or hell.
Yeah.
Well, that changes people's mind, don't it? They're still sinning. They don't care. But when you tell them about how you're affecting God, and that's what's different about us, we're telling you how you affect God's heart. And when you affect God's heart, you're affecting his people, his church. The strength of the church that's here and the strength of the pastor. But Brother Nene hit right on it about the pastor, loving the words. And he hit the order of how God speaks to that pastor. That was amazing. But the bulwarks, tell the towers, let the generation know. Sorry, just felt that.
Go to preaching. That's all right with me. I think there's several really good lessons in what you said. A couple of examples were extreme examples, like this brother we dealt with. But at the heart of it, I really appreciated that the point you made was we're not trying to humiliate somebody. There has been a spirit sometimes in the past that I can't say everybody has outgrown it, but I believe we have outgrown it, where there was a desire to make such an example of anybody that crosses any line, even if they don't know the line's there, so that you put a fear in that assembly. Now, you might think that's really productive and there's a psychology to it that's productive, but it's not spiritual. It's not godly. The psychology is, if I get up in the pulpit and start rebuking conditions very directly and absolutely humiliating people that are sitting there, or somebody challenges me in some way, which maybe they didn't even know they were challenging me, they just act in some disrespectful manner, and I get up and absolutely humiliate them. Number one, you're going to make it extremely hard to ever reach that person. You pretty much are pushing them out the door by doing something like that, unless they're extremely mature. Number two, and I'm building on what you brethren just said, you are going to create a spirit in the assembly in two different ways. You're going to create a spirit where leaders in the assembly think that's appropriate behavior, where now you're perpetuating the behavior. You'll also create a spirit in assembly of fear and a cringing, intimidating environment where I might get hit. Now, if the goal, and I'm being very straight with you on this, all right? If the goal is for the person in charge to have more control, you might want to run things that way, where people are terrified to cross you, because that will pretty much assure your control, or else it'll assure anybody that could be a quote-unquote rebel that they'll leave because they don't want to be treated like that, or whatever the case might be. But if your goal is what you brothers were talking about, that you really want to help the person, you love the person, you're not going to approach it that way. For the very reason I said earlier, the domino effect will be you're going to do more damage. You're going to damage the church. You're going to damage the leadership you're developing. You're going to damage the person you're attacking. You'll do 3 different points of damage. And you'll damage your own reputation, standing, and you'll certainly damage your spirit. Because if you start teaching that this is appropriate, and that's what's been done with some leaders, they have been taught that it's appropriate, and then they reinforce it to themselves. This is the way to do it. This is the way to do it. This is the way to do it. And what you did caused more damage than good. Here's one way you could look at it, I suppose. You need to examine the root and the fruit. The fruit, like we were talking about last Wednesday, what does this produce? If it's producing something good and godly, you can't criticize it. You may not do it that way. You may not like it. Maybe that's not your style. Maybe that's not your gift. Maybe you don't have that type of ministerial operation or whatever, but you can't criticize it if it's actually producing something good and godly. The root is the other side of the equation, in the sense that where did this come from? What started this? Why is it being done this way? If we ever get to a point where we try to shut down people who simply want to know why, you probably need to leave. Because any environment where somebody will not answer the question why, to their actions, to their teaching, their requirements, whatever, you're in a dangerous environment. Because someone that won't answer why is not answering why because either they don't have a why or they don't want you to know the why. If you knew the why is because it gives me more power. Well, they're not going to admit that. Or the why is I just like it this way. It doesn't matter that the Bible doesn't say it. We're just touching a bunch of different things here. But what I really appreciate that you brethren brought up is the way to handle people. That would apply not only to someone in an extreme situation who walks in off the street like you were describing. That would also apply to somebody that's just younger in the Lord. It applied to somebody that may have been here a long time, but they don't really know yet. They're not strong enough yet. And not everybody is strong enough to take correction. Strong enough. Not everybody's mature enough to take correction. It's not just they're not strong enough. You have to be pretty strong to take correction and deal with it. Even what someone might politically correctly or gently call constructive criticism, which could be constructive or destructive, even that can be rough. Someone gives you some constructive criticism, especially if it's someone you love and respect, or if it's someone who has some kind of potential to affect your progress in terms of at a job or in the church or whatever. I'm always especially careful when I'm thinking about correcting things. How can I do this? And this is what I thought is, Brother Chappell, maybe Brother Ferris, you focused on this a little bit more, but both of you did. This is what I thought when you were talking. How do you do this, not only in the least destructive way, but in a way that if it is possible, they don't even know the situation got corrected? And there's when you're in a service, it's especially important for several reasons. Number one, we don't want to put the person in a spotlight and humiliate them unless there's no other choice. There is a series of things that maybe we'll have time to talk about this time or one of the other times. You all know them, I'm sure, Matthew 18 and other places. There's a series of steps you take when there's a problem, especially if it's between people, where there's some kind of a conflict. It doesn't start with publicly humiliating them.
No.
Now, when you've had men in leadership that use that methodology, that the first step is to publicly humiliate you, and then they call that divine order. Let me say it as straight as possible. They are out of order because the process is never to start by publicly attacking somebody or humiliating them. And that's what I was alluding to earlier. The only time you should ever be in a position where you have to deal with something in a way that's shocking and jarring and maybe public is if there is absolutely no other choice. Something so crazy is going on that you have to stop it cold and fast. And that can be jarring. It can be shocking. But even then, you don't do it in a way that draws attention to it. There's times I've had to deal with things that I hope none of you knew were going on, but some of you probably did in the service with just some newer folks. And I've even had to talk to the music staff about it and say, if you see me, and this is an example, I don't believe in micromanaging a service. I'm not always telling the music staff everything to do. In fact, I barely tell them anything. But there are times when I am going to tell them, okay, let's kind of take this down and slowly close this out, or we'll end the song here. Sometimes that's because there's something that needs to not be allowed to run loose. And I'm not talking about just someone worshiping, nothing like that. I mean, something you don't know is going on that could get out of hand in a way that is not the Spirit. And so those are things that as time goes on, if you're in a pastoral role, that I can talk to you about them on the side. But most of those lessons are on the job training. You're not going to have someone sit you down and go through those so much as you're going to have to learn them the hard way. You're going to have to learn them under fire, where it's happening and what am I going to do about that? But as I said a minute ago, sometimes in the past, the goal has been you want to do it as publicly as possible. So people are afraid. No one will ever do that again because look how he just humiliated them in front of everybody. Or he just made a scene stopping it. There's two reasons someone would make a scene to stop it. Either to create a feeling of intimidation so everybody else is afraid to ever do that, which might be great if it's something horrifying. But the other reason is to look more powerful. Like, look at me. Look what I just did. I said move and you moved. And what big man I am, so to speak. So there's ego and pride that might cause you to handle someone in an overly authoritarian way. But there's also a desire to create fear. Neither one of those are appropriate motivations. There are times when you have to rebuke before all. That's the last stage. It's said a couple different ways in the Bible. Both Jesus and Paul talked about it can get to a point where you got to bring it before the whole group. That is reserved for things that have escalated in the face of authority. I didn't say they escalated because you weren't paying attention. Sometimes things escalate because we let it go. That's our fault. If you're sitting back there watching it and it's getting worse and worse and worse, and you're the one who's going to have to bite the bullet on that one. You're the one who probably should have to deal with the humiliation on that one. Don't humiliate them. You let them get there. We may come back to these scriptures if we have time or another time. That's the nice thing about us getting on a schedule now with these meetings is we can get into these discussions and come back to them. But you may have a one-on-one session. Not that Brother Ken and I need to have one, but I'm aiming at him. Brother Ken and I may have a one-on-one session about some conflict we have, and it doesn't resolve it. Now, by the way, that goes up and down. It's not just the pastor tried to correct you, and you're not responding to his correction, so let's take it to the next level. There can be times when a pastor does something they shouldn't be doing. And you come to the pastor and you're like, I don't understand. And by the way, it doesn't matter who you're talking about. We show respect. Even if someone isn't deserving of respect, we show respect. Because we are gentlemen.
Yes.
Not because they are. I've shown respect to people that treated me very disrespectfully. And they treated me very disrespectfully in pretty public ways. And I'm not saying this is a bragging point. I'm saying it because I hope you'll follow this path. I never reciprocated. I could have easily humiliated them when they were on my turf, so to speak, but I did not. In fact, I did the opposite. And doing the opposite may seem incorrect, like, well, they did something wrong, so at the very least, you should just ice them out, or you don't ice people out. No. We're trying to help people. Yes. And I so appreciate what Sister Olga said today in the Sunday school. This is so straightforward and common sense, but better really give it some thought. Your enemies are not always God's enemies. God may be still wanting to save them. And if you destroy them and realize that God may be being merciful in some areas, we always have to think with trying to save the person. So coming back to this point, if Brother Ken and I had some clash, it would go both directions. If he and I had a clash between us and it was my fault, I clearly did something hurtful to him, and he came to me and we didn't get it resolved. And usually if you don't get it resolved, it's going to amplify it. I mean, it's going to accelerate it. It's going to get worse. You don't have a problem that doesn't get fixed that just stays static. It grows. It's like a root of bitterness. The next thing that would need to happen. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's two different directions of this. And this is ministerial etiquette. It's proper respect for an office. You probably wouldn't bring 2 or 3 of your friends to challenge the pastor. You need to bring 2 or 3 people that are neutral and very senior people, either a senior in that assembly or other ministers. And by the way, I would advise you, if you ever find yourself in this position, I would like to hope, because I know my own heart and my character that I'm holding, my integrity, I'd like to hope you'll never find yourself in this position as long as I'm your pastor, but if you find yourself in this position, the wisest thing to do with an authority figure is let them know what you're about to do. Say, I feel like we can't resolve this. I mean, do it respectfully, and I feel like we need to sit down with a couple other people, other ministers most likely, and it needs to be as neutral as possible. Now, the opposite direction, that's if there's a problem with someone senior to you. The opposite direction, if you're in a leadership role, you can't bring your allies either. If you've got some problem with someone in the assembly that they're not correcting, you can't just bring people you know don't like that person. I'm going to come back to my example I used in the beginning. This particular person had one very senior brother in the church who really, sorry to say it, but it just was a long-standing prejudice. Both these 2 senior brothers are passed away now. But one of those senior brothers really didn't like this person. Most everyone loved him, but he didn't really like him. He had heard some stuff, and it hardened his heart against him. The one I had to correct, I'm talking about. He knew this older brother would not have been his ally. The other brother was somebody who he knew absolutely loved him, but it's also somebody who had the curtain opened. It was one of the people who actually saw the situation, but he knew without a shadow of a doubt, this person loves me. So when God decided to deal with the condition, I dealt with it. But when God gave me the go-ahead and the authority and the right words to deal with the condition, I came into service that day. I wasn't planning on dealing with it that day. In fact, it hadn't come to a head quite yet. It came to a head right at the beginning of service. I started hearing stuff right at the beginning of service. I knew I'm going to have to sit down with this person as soon as service is over. The person who he had a problem with had gone to another church to take a service that day. The person who was his closest companion was working a little late after church that day. So I pulled him into the office with me. I said, I want someone else to be with us to make you more comfortable. It was someone he knew loved him deeply. It wasn't someone he thought was going to be joining me to beat up on him, like I brought an ally. This subject we're discussing is so deep. You could use all kinds of different examples and approaches, but I'm just trying to get you a starting point for handling conflicts and handling conditions in the church. So the second stage of it is, after you've talked to a person, if you can't get through to them, and I'll maybe come back to Matthew 18 and some of that, but you do need to bring somebody else. It needs to be somebody who's the right person now. And eventually it could get to a place where it has to be brought before the whole assembly, for the whole group. But that's when something has continually escalated, where you've had an escalation of resistance, where you've tried to correct it. Again, this goes up or down. You try to correct the situation, it won't be corrected. You've brought more people, won't be corrected. Maybe you've even sat down in a small group, won't be corrected. And the person is still continuing to cause serious issues that could be damaging to the church. There's when you finally get to the place, and it does say this. It says, you rebuke before all, that all may fear. But see, that's not what you start with. That's a last resort. The goal isn't to cause everybody to be afraid. It's that if it gets this bad, where a person is this incorrigible, you have no choice. And the whole church does need to see this is not going to be tolerated. There's some things that cannot be tolerated. Now, some things you don't tolerate, and most things are this way, in a stepped fashion. So I see somebody doing something that, no, we don't want that. I'm not going to rebuke them before the whole church. And by the way, when I talk to them, my hope is that the scalpel is so sharp they don't know that I'm cutting anything away. So that when we have the conversation, you're so careful, and there's so much charity there in terms of love, that they don't even recognize they just got corrected. That's okay. They don't have to know they got corrected unless they're incorrigible. A person doesn't have to know you corrected them unless they're in a pretty rebellious state. Then they might need to know. But a person who doesn't realize what they're doing is a problem, the more gently we can correct it, the better. And so you want to show as much consideration to a person as possible, as you were talking about, Brother Ferris. That is so critical. We're not trying to tear this thing up so it looks perfect. It's never going to look perfect till Jesus comes. There's going to be problem children. I wish it weren't so, and if we can fix it, we're going to fix it. But all we can do is try to keep this thing moving forward and try to save every single person possible.